The neutral zone stretched across 3 star systems like a scar through the galaxy's flesh. For 700 years, no ship had dared cross the invisible boundary that separated the known universe from the territory of the Vorthak Dominion. The treaty was absolute, carved in neutronium and sealed with the blood of 1 billion souls who had died in the Great Silence War. Yet here, drifting through the quantum static at the zone's edge, was the Wanderer's Gambit, a ship that shouldn't exist, piloted by a human who shouldn't be alive. Captain Kalen Voss pressed his palm against the viewport, watching the crimson nebula that marked the zone's boundary pulse like a dying heart. His ship bore scars that told stories no sane being would believe, hull breaches sealed with crystallized time, engines that ran on compressed starlight, and weapon systems that had been declared theoretical impossibilities by the galactic science. "Conclave! Sir!" His navigator's voice crackled through the comm, distorted by the zone's interference. "The hegemony patrol ships are requesting immediate compliance. They want us to turn back." Kalen didn't respond immediately. Behind him, the bridge hummed with energy that made reality itself tremble. His crew, a collection of outcasts, rebels, and the chronically curious, worked at stations that defied conventional engineering. The ship's AI, housed in a crystalline matrix that pulsed with its own inner light, whispered calculations that bent the laws of physics. "Captain Voss," the hegemony commander's transmission broke through the static. "You are approaching the neutral zone. By Galactic Concordat 7741, passage is forbidden. Turn your vessel around immediately or face immediate termination." Kalen finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much and lost everything that mattered. "Tell them I'm already dead, Nix. Has been for 3 years, according to their own records." Nix, 7, his Syntherian communications officer, tilted her chrome-plated head. "Shall I remind them that dead men can't violate treaties?" "No." Kalen moved to his command chair, a throne of obsidian and neural interfaces that had been grafted from a derelict godship. "Tell them that Captain Kalen Voss died at the Battle of Proxima Wound. What they're looking at now is something else, entirely." The hegemony patrol ships, sleek predators bristling with conventional weaponry, maintained their formation at the zone's perimeter. They were good ships, crewed by competent beings who followed orders and believed in the sanctity of treaties. They had no idea they were looking at a vessel that had sailed through the event horizon of a black hole and returned with its crew still breathing. "Sir," called out Vex, his engineer, her 4 arms dancing across control surfaces that glowed with unstable energy. "The quantum resonance cascade is reaching critical alignment. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." Kalen smiled, the expression carrying no warmth. "Do you know why no one crosses the neutral zone, Vex? Because the Vorthak will obliterate anything that enters their territory? No." Kalen's fingers found the activation controls for systems that existed in 12 dimensions simultaneously. "Because everyone assumes the Vorthak are still there." The Wanderer's Gambit shimmered, its hull becoming translucent as exotic matter, flowed through conduits that pulsed with captured lightning. Around them, space began to fold, reality bending to accommodate a ship that had learned to exist in the spaces between atoms. The hegemony commander's final transmission arrived as the ship crossed the boundary. "Captain Voss, what are you?" As the crimson veil of the neutral zone engulfed them, Kalen whispered to the void, "I'm the answer to a question nobody was brave enough to ask." The ship vanished, leaving only quantum echoes and the fading whisper of an impossible engine singing lullabies to dying stars. 3 hours into the neutral zone, the universe changed. The crimson nebula gave way to something that made Kalen's enhanced perception recoil in instinctive terror. Space here wasn't empty. It was hollow, carved out by forces that had eaten reality itself. Stars hung in impossible geometries, their light bent into spirals that spelled out warnings in languages that predated civilization. "Captain," Nick Seven's voice carried harmonics of fear that her Syntherian programming wasn't supposed to allow. "The quantum scanners are detecting massive structural anomalies. These star systems, they're not natural formations." Kalen studied the tactical display, his augmented mind processing information that would have driven a baseline human insane. The Vorthak had been busy during their 7th century isolation. Entire worlds had been reshaped into geometric impossibilities, their surfaces covered in structures that hurt to perceive directly. "Vex, what's our resonance stability?" "Holding at 93%, the engineer reported, her secondary, arms adjusting compensators that channeled energy from parallel dimensions. "The ship's quantum signature is still coherent, but something's watching us." She was right. The Wanderer's gambit had sailed through cosmic horrors that would make gods weep, but this felt different. This felt interested. "Merrick," Kalen called to his weapons officer, a Corvin whose species had been extinct for millennia until they'd found him in a temporal paradox. "Power up the null cannons, but keep them on standby. Whatever we find here, conventional tactics, won't work." "Understood, Captain. Though I should mention, the targeting computers are having difficulty locking onto anything out there. Reality keeps shifting." Kalen nodded. He'd expected as much. The Vorthak had always been masters of dimensional warfare, but what he was seeing suggested they'd evolved beyond even those capabilities. The question was, evolved into what? "Sir," Nick Seven's chrome features flickered with incoming data streams. "I'm detecting a transmission. It's old, pre-war frequency using Vorthak linguistic protocols from before the Great Silence." "Put it through." The bridge filled with a sound that was part harmonic resonance, part crystalline chiming, and part something that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to the soul. When the universal translator finally processed it, the words carried. "An impossible wait. The throne bearers have journeyed beyond the final veil. The watchers have learned to dream. Why do the small makers return to the Garden of Endings?" Kalen felt his blood freeze. The Vorthak had been terrifying enough when they were merely an advanced species with reality-warping technology. But this suggested something far more profound had occurred during their isolation. "Respond," he ordered. "Tell them that Captain Kalen Voss of the vessel Wanderer's Gambit seeks passage to the throne worlds." The silence that followed stretched for 17 minutes. When the response came, it arrived not as sound, but as direct neural transmission that bypassed all shielding. "Kalen, who died but walks. Your vessel bears the scent of the deep black, the touch of the singing void. You have sailed between the spaces where light fears to travel. Why do you seek the empty thrones?" Vex looked up from her instruments, confusion written across her alien features. "Captain, how do they know about—" "Because they've been there too," Kalen interrupted, understanding beginning to dawn. The Vorthak didn't retreat behind the neutral zone to lick their wounds. They went exploring, found the places beyond, the edge of the galaxy, the realms where physics break down and consciousness becomes a navigational tool. And now they're, what, ascended beings? No. Kalen activated the ship's most exotic sensors, instruments that could perceive the quantum, foam beneath reality. They're gone. The readings confirmed his suspicions. The Vorthak worlds were empty, their cities inhabited only by echoes and automated systems maintaining civilizations for beings who had transcended physical existence. The mighty dominion that had held the galaxy in terror had simply moved on. "Captain," Merrick called urgently, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures. Something's coming through the dimensional barriers." The view screen flickered, showing space, tearing open like fabric. Through the rent in reality came ships, if they could be called ships. They were architectural impossibilities, structures that existed in more dimensions than three-space could contain, crewed by beings who had learned to think in mathematics rather than flesh. The Vorthak? Nix-7 asked. No, Kalen said grimly. The Vorthak's neighbors, and they're not happy about uninvited guests. The entities that emerged from the dimensional rifts defied classification. They piloted vessels constructed from crystallized gravity and fossilized time, their forms shifting between states of matter like thoughts becoming reality. Where the Vorthak had been terrifying in their alien logic, these beings were horrifying in their complete abandonment of any recognizable framework for existence. Shields at maximum, Kalen ordered, as reality-shearing beams lanced toward the Wanderer's gambit. Vex, route power through the quantum cascade generators. The ship's defensive systems activated with a sound like dying stars singing opera. Fields of compressed space-time deflected attacks that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The Wanderer's gambit had been built, or perhaps grown, to survive encounters with cosmic horrors, but even Kalen's impossible vessel strained against forces that casually rewrote the fundamental constants of physics. They're not trying to destroy us, Marek observed, his ancient warrior instincts parsing the attack patterns. They're testing us. Probing our defenses, Kalen agreed, watching the tactical display as the entity ships moved in formations that created geometric pain. They want to know what we are. A transmission burst through their quantum shielding, carrying information that made the bridge instruments scream in harmonic discord. When the translation matrix finally processed it, the message was elegantly simple. Small flesh that walks between. You carry the death signature of the void touched. Your vessel drinks from the wells of unmaking. Are you the herald of the final convergence? Nix-7's chrome features reflected the pulsing lights of emergency systems. Captain, they're referring to something called the final convergence. My linguistic analysis suggests it's a prophetic concept, an event when all realities collapse. Into a single point. Sir, Vex called out, her forearms working frantically at control surfaces that existed partially in normal space and partially in the quantum foam. The entities are generating a containment field. We're being invited somewhere. Through the view screen, space folded itself into an origami butterfly made of dark matter and regret. The Wanderer's gambit was drawn inexorably toward what could only be described as a city built from the architectural dreams of mad gods. Towers spiraled through dimensions that hurt to perceive, their surfaces covered in equations that solved themselves in real time. Streets paved with compressed probability wound between buildings that existed in quantum superposition, simultaneously ruined and pristine, ancient and newly born. Welcome to Axiom Meridian, the entity transmission continued, now carrying undertones of something almost resembling hospitality. The last city of the architects, where thought becomes law and law becomes suffering. The ship settled onto a landing platform that examined them molecule by molecule as they touched down. Through the viewports, they could see beings, or the shadows of beings, moving through spaces that existed in mathematical rather than physical dimensions. Captain, Marek said quietly, my combat systems are detecting over 3 million distinct threat signatures, and that's just in our immediate vicinity. Noted. Kalen stood, activating environmental systems that would allow them to survive in spaces where reality was more of a suggestion than a law. Nix, establish a quantum link with the ship's AI. If something happens to us, it needs to be able to navigate home. Where exactly is home, sir? She asked. Given our current temporal displacement, Earth might not exist yet, or it might have been consumed by entropy billions of years ago. Kalen smiled grimly. Then I suppose we'll have to make a new one. They made their way to the airlock, each step taking them further from anything resembling conventional existence. The city outside hummed with energies that predated the birth of stars, its inhabitants moving through spaces that folded and unfolded like thoughts becoming manifest. As the airlock cycled, Kalen felt the familiar weight of his sidearm, a weapon that fired bullets made from crystallized paradox and powered by temporal feedback loops. It had never failed to kill whatever he pointed it at, but he doubted even impossible ammunition would be effective against beings who had transcended the need for physical form. "Captain," Vex said, her voice carrying harmonics of awe and terror, "the atmospheric composition is fluid. It's changing to accommodate our biological requirements." "The architects are being polite," Kalen observed. "That worries me more than if they'd tried to kill us immediately." The airlock opened onto a street paved with crystallized space-time, where beings of living mathematics walked alongside entities that existed as pure concept given form, and waiting for them, in a form that was almost but not quite Vorthak, stood something that had once been alive in the conventional sense. "Greetings," Void touched, it said in a voice like reality being, gently torn. "I am the echo of First Throne Bearer Zix Thanul. I have been waiting 700 years to speak with you." "About what?" "About why you're here. About what you've become. And about the war that's coming. The war for the right to exist in a universe that's running out of room for consciousness." The echo of First Thronebearer, Zix Thanul led them through streets that rewrote themselves with each step, past markets where concepts were traded for compressed time and libraries that contained books written in languages that didn't exist yet. The city of Axiom Meridian existed in a state of constant flux, its architecture adapting to the thoughts and needs of its inhabitants. "Your species fascinates us," the echo said, its form shifting between states of matter like smoke given purpose. "Humans possess a unique quality among sentient life. You refuse to accept impossibility as permanent." Kalen kept his hand near his paradox pistol, though he doubted it would be effective against something that existed primarily as a philosophical construct. "Is that why the Vorthak abandoned physical space? They got tired of dealing with human stubbornness?" "The Vorthak didn't abandon anything." The echo paused beside a fountain that dispensed liquid starlight. "They evolved, transcended, became something that no longer required matter to exist. But in doing so, they left behind responsibilities. They entered a structure that defied geometric possibility, a council chamber whose walls curved inward and outward simultaneously, creating a space that was somehow both intimate and infinite. At its center stood a holographic display showing the galaxy, but not as any chart had ever depicted it. "This is the true map," the echo explained. "Reality as it actually exists, not the simplified version your instruments can perceive." The galaxy writhed with energy streams and dimensional barriers, its spiral arms connected by bridges of pure thought. But vast sections were dark, not empty, but consumed, their matter and energy converted into something else entirely. "The Devourers," Nix 7 whispered, her Syntherian databases matching the display to ancient legends. "The entities that feed on consciousness itself. They are real," the echo confirmed. "And they are coming. The Vorthak's transcendence was not an evolution. It was a retreat. They abandoned physical existence to escape beings that consume souls. Like your people consume breath." Vex studied the display with her engineer's eye for detail. "The dark zones are expanding. At this rate, they'll reach inhabited systems within 57 standard years," the echo finished. "Unless something prevents them." Kalen felt the pieces falling into place. "That's why the neutral zone exists. Not to keep us out of Vorthak space, but to keep something else from getting out." "Correct. But the barriers are failing. The Devourers have learned to navigate dimensional barriers, to exist in the spaces between thoughts. Soon, they will break through into your reality." Marek's combat instincts were screaming warnings. "And you want us to stop them? A single ship against entities that made the Vorthak flee?" "Not a single ship," the echo said, gesturing to the display. "Look more closely at your vessel's quantum signature." The hologram zoomed in on the Wanderer's gambit, revealing energy patterns that extended far beyond the ship's physical boundaries. Threads of force connected it to points throughout the galaxy. Other vessels, other crews, other impossible ships that existed in the margins of reality. You are not alone, Captain Voss. When you died at the Battle of Proxima Wound, your consciousness touched the quantum foam that underlies all existence. In that moment, you became a focal point, a catalyst that draws together others who have transcended normal limitations. The Ghost Fleet, Kalen breathed, remembering encounters with ships that shouldn't exist, crews that had died but continued sailing the void between stars. We prefer the term the necessary, beings who have learned to exist in the spaces where conventional life cannot survive. The devourers cannot consume what does not technically exist. The echo moved to the chamber's center, its form becoming more solid, more real. But you require knowledge, power, and above all, unity. The architects have been preparing for this war for millennia. We offer you the tools to forge the dead into an army. At what cost? Kalen asked, because there was always a cost. Truth. The truth about what you are, what you've become, and what you must sacrifice to save a universe that will never know you existed. The chamber filled with light that wasn't quite light, and suddenly Kalen could see, really see, the network of impossible ships and crews that spread across the galaxy like a web of quantum intention. Hundreds of vessels, thousands of beings, who had died but refused to stop fighting, all of them connected to him. All of them waiting for orders from a captain who shouldn't exist, commanding a fleet of the technically deceased in a war against entities that fed on the very concept of being alive. Show me, Kalen said. The echo smiled with something that might have been approval. Welcome to the ranks of the necessarily dead, Captain. Your real war begins now. The truth hit Kalen like a collapsing star, through the quantum network that connected him to the Ghost Fleet. The necessary. He could feel them all. Captain Iril of the Entropy's Defiance, who had died ramming a star killer and now commanded a vessel made from crystallized time. Commander Kex of the Probability Storm, whose consciousness had been scattered across 17 dimensions during a dimensional warfare experiment, yet somehow still functioned as a coherent tactical mind. Dozens of others, all connected by the simple fact that they had died in service of something greater and refused to let death stop them. The network is elegant, the echo explained, as data flowed directly into Kalen's consciousness. Each vessel, each crew, exists in a quantum superposition. Between life and death, the devourers cannot consume what doesn't technically exist in any single state of reality. Vex stared at her captain with new understanding. Sir, the modifications to our ship, they weren't just improvements. They were preparations, converting us into something that could exist in the quantum foam. The process is not without cost. The echo continued. To become truly effective against the devourers, you must surrender the last vestiges of your connection to conventional existence. You must become ghosts in truth as well as name. Kalen felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a shroud made of collapsed possibilities. How many ships can we muster? Currently, 347 vessels of various configurations. But the process is ongoing. Each engagement with the devourers creates new members of the necessary, beings who die fighting the impossible, and return as impossibilities themselves. On the holographic display, the galaxy's dark zones pulsed with malevolent intelligence. The devourers weren't just consuming matter and energy, they were unmaking the very concepts that allowed reality to function. Stars died not from lack of fuel, but from the universe simply forgetting how nuclear fusion worked in their vicinity. Their advanced scouts are already probing your reality, the echo warned. Small incursions, testing the boundaries between dimensions. Your governments blame equipment failures, cosmic anomalies, acts of unknown enemies. They don't realize they're witnessing the systematic deconstruction of physical law. Nick 7's chrome features reflected patterns of data that hurt to process directly. Captain, I'm receiving transmission bursts from across the network. The Ghost Fleet is requesting orders. What kind of orders? Where to die next, sir? How to make their deaths count? The casual way she said it chilled Kalen more than facing. Down cosmic horrors. This was what they had become. A fleet of willing martyrs who treated death as a tactical deployment rather than an ending. The architects have prepared resources for your war, the Echo said, gesturing to alcoves that materialized. Around the chamber, each contained weapons, equipment, and technologies that existed in states of controlled impossibility. Null torpedoes that delete their targets from the universal equation, shield generators that exist in negative space, navigation systems that chart courses through regions where causality runs backward. Merrick examined a rifle that seemed to fire concentrated absence. These weapons, they're not just advanced technology, they're weaponized paradoxes. Correct. To fight beings that consume reality, you must attack with unreality. To defeat enemies that exist by feeding on consciousness, you must become unconscious, aware but not alive, thinking but not being. Kalen picked up a command interface that felt warm despite being made from crystallized void. The moment his fingers touched it, he could feel the entire Ghost Fleet responding to his presence, ships scattered across impossible distances all, turning their attention to a captain they had never met but whose quantum signature they recognized as their own. There's something else, the Echo said, its form beginning to fade as the chamber around them started to dissolve. The Devourers are not the only threat. Your own governments are beginning to suspect that something has changed in the fabric of reality. They're developing weapons designed to destroy quantum anomalies, weapons that would unmake your entire fleet. Our own people would destroy us? They fear what they don't understand. And you, Captain Voss, have become something that even you don't fully understand. The city of Axiom Meridian faded around them, revealing the Wanderer's gambit exactly where they had left it. But now Kalen could see the ship as it truly was, a nexus point in a network of impossible vessels, each one a weapon in a war that hadn't officially begun. Your first engagement will come sooner than you think, the Echo's voice whispered from dimensions that couldn't quite be reached. The Devourers have noticed your presence. They're coming to investigate what you are. Kalen settled into his, command chair, feeling the weight of 347 crews depending on his decisions. Then we'd better make sure they don't survive the experience. The attack came without warning, as attacks from beings that existed outside conventional space-time always did. Reality simply cracked. Contact! Merrick roared, as his impossible instruments detected threats approaching from directions that had no names. Multiple signatures closing from angles that don't exist! The view screen showed empty space, but Kalen's enhanced perception revealed the truth. Devourers move through the quantum foam like sharks through water, their forms visible only as absences in the fabric of existence, holes in reality that devoured everything they touched. All hands. Battle stations. Kalen's voice carried, across the ship and through the quantum network to every vessel in the Ghost Fleet. This is not a drill! The necessary are going to war! Across the galaxy, impossible ships received the signal and began converging on Kalen's position. The Entropy's Defiance tore through folded space, its crystallized time hull gleaming with paradoxical fire. The probability storm materialized from 17 dimensions simultaneously, its crew of scattered consciousness focusing their collective will into weapons that fired controlled causality violations. Captain, Nick 7 reported, her chrome features reflecting energy patterns that existed only in mathematical theory. I'm counting 43 Devourer entities. They're trying to unmake the local space-time matrix. Vex, status on our exotic systems? Quantum cascade generators at 112%. the engineer called back, her four arms dancing across control surfaces that existed in conceptual rather than physical space. Null cannons charging. Reality anchor systems online. And stable. As stable as they ever get. The first Devourer struck the Wanderer's gambit with an attack that tried to convince the universe that the ship had never existed. Kalen felt the assault like ice in his soul, as probability waves washed over them, each one attempting to edit them out of the cosmic equation. Shields holding, Vex reported through gritted teeth. But they're not trying to destroy us. They're trying to make us never have been built. Fire null torpedoes, full spread! The weapons that emerged from the Wanderer's gambit weren't projectiles in any conventional sense. They were concentrated impossibilities, regions of space where the laws of physics had been politely asked to step aside. Where they struck the Devourers, reality reasserted itself with violent enthusiasm, causing the entities to momentarily exist and therefore become vulnerable. Direct hits on 3 targets, Merrick confirmed. They're confused. They don't understand what just happened to them. Through the quantum network, Kalen could feel the other ships of the Ghost Fleet engaging Devourers across multiple star systems. Captain Earl was using her crystallized time hull to create temporal paradoxes that trapped the entities in causality loops. Commander Kex had distributed her consciousness across her crew, turning the entire ship into a single hive-mind weapon system. But for every Devourer they destroyed, 2 more seemed to emerge from the spaces between thoughts. "Sir," Nick 7 called, urgently, "I'm detecting massive quantum disturbances. Something big is coming through the dimensional barriers." The space around them began to fold in patterns that hurt to perceive. Through the rent in reality came something that made the other Devourers look like minnows beside a leviathan. This entity didn't just consume reality, it commanded it, reshaping the fundamental forces of physics with the casual authority of a god editing its own biography. "Primary Devourer," Kalen breathed, recognizing the signature from the architect's data. "A being that has consumed entire galaxies' worth of consciousness." The entity's attention turned to the Wanderer's gambit, and Kalen felt his mind being examined by something that existed as pure, malevolent intelligence. When it spoke, the words bypassed all translation protocols and appeared directly in their consciousness. "What are you, little ghost? You taste of death, but think with life. You exist in the spaces where we feed, yet we cannot consume you. I'm your replacement," Kalen replied, his voice carrying across dimensions to reach the entity. The universe's answer to a question it should never have had to ask. The primary Devourer's response was to unleash an attack that tried to unmake not just the ship, but the entire concept of the ship having ever been imagined. Kalen felt reality shifting around them as the entity attempted to edit them out of history itself. "All ships," he broadcast across the quantum network. "Execute. Convergence Protocol 7, now!" Across the galaxy, every vessel in the Ghost Fleet responded to the command by doing something that should have been impossible. They died. Simultaneously, voluntarily, and in dying as one, they became something new, a single entity distributed. Across space and time, a collective consciousness that existed in the quantum foam between life and death. Kalen felt himself expanding, his awareness suddenly encompassing hundreds of ships, thousands of crew members, all united in a purpose that transcended individual existence. The primary Devourer recoiled as it encountered something it had never faced before, a prey species that had learned to weaponize its own extinction. "Fire!" Kalen commanded with voices that spoke from every ship simultaneously. The Ghost Fleet's coordinated assault struck the primary Devourer with weapons that existed in states of controlled impossibility. Null cannons fired concentrated. Nothing. Paradox torpedoes delivered philosophical contradictions that made the entity question its own existence. Reality anchors forced it to exist in a single-dimensional state, making it vulnerable to conventional physics, which promptly tried to make up for lost time by applying 700 years' worth of entropy in a single instant. The primary devourer screamed with a sound that was felt rather than heard, a harmonics of dissolution that made nearby stars flicker in sympathy. And then, impossibly, it began to retreat. "They're withdrawing," Commander Kex reported across the network. "All devourer entities are falling back to their dimensional barriers." "For now," Kalen replied, his consciousness slowly contracting back to his individual body as the ghost fleet returned to discrete existence. "But they'll be back, and next time they'll know what we are." "What are we, Captain?" Vex asked quietly. Kalen looked out at the stars, seeing them not as distant suns but as coordinates in a vast battlefield where the war for existence itself was just beginning. "We're the thing that monsters have nightmares about," he said, "and we're just getting started." 6 months after the first engagement, the war between the living and the necessary had begun in earnest. The galactic governments had finally detected the Ghost Fleet's existence, and their response was as predictable as it was catastrophic. Task forces of conventional warships hunted the impossible vessels with weapons designed to collapse quantum fields and force paradoxical entities back into normal space, where they would simply cease to exist. "Report from the Entropy's Defiance," Nix 7 announced, her chrome features reflecting data streams that pulsed with urgency. "Captain Iril is under attack by Terran Federation forces. They're using quantum scramblers to disrupt her ship's probability matrix." Kalen stood at the center of the Wanderer's Gambit's bridge, his consciousness partially extended through the network that connected him to every vessel in the Ghost Fleet. Through their sensors, he could perceive dozens of engagements occurring, simultaneously across the galaxy. The necessary, fighting a three-way war against the Devourers, their own governments, and the fundamental laws of reality itself. Status on the dimensional barriers? "Failing faster than anticipated," Vex reported, her 4 arms working at control surfaces that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "The Devourers' retreat wasn't strategic. They were regrouping. They're bringing everything they have." Through the quantum network, Kalen felt the weight of command pressing down on him like the gravity of a collapsed star. 347 ships had become nearly 800 as more crews died in impossible circumstances and returned as members of the necessary. But even their growing numbers might not be enough for what was coming. "Sir," Marek called. From his weapons station, "I'm detecting massive quantum disturbances at the galactic edge. The signature matches primary devourer classifications, but bigger." "Show me." The main display revealed something that challenged even Kalen's enhanced perception. At the galaxy's rim, space itself was being consumed by entities so vast that they used star systems as stepping stones. These weren't just devourers, they were the things that devourers aspired to become. "Omega-class entities?" Kalen breathed, recognizing the classifications from the architect's data. "Beings that have consumed so much consciousness they've become cosmic forces in their own right." "They're not just eating stars," Nix 7 observed, her voice carrying harmonics of awe and terror. "They're unmaking the concept of stellar formation. Regions where they've passed, it's not that stars are dying, it's that the universe is forgetting how to make them." The communication system crackled with an incoming transmission from the echo of First Throne Bearer Zix Thunnel. "Captain Voss, the time for preparation is ended. The final convergence approaches. The moment when all possible realities collapse into a single point. If the Omega entities reach the galactic core, they will consume the quantum foam that underlies existence itself. What do you need from us?" "Everything. The architects have prepared one final gift, but it requires the willing sacrifice of every member of the necessary. You must die as one to become something greater, a single entity that can exist in the space before creation, where the Omega entities were born. Kalen felt the weight of every crew member's attention as they listened to the Echo's words. He could sense their fear, their determination, and their absolute trust in his judgment. These beings had already died once for the greater good. Now they were being asked to die again, permanently this time. What would we become? A guardian. A consciousness that exists at the foundation of reality itself, preventing anything from unmaking the universe from within. You would be the immune system that existence never knew it needed. And if we refuse, then everything ends. Not just life, not just matter and energy, but the very possibility of anything ever existing again. Kalen closed his eyes and felt, through the network to every ship, every crew member, every impossible being who had chosen to continue fighting even after death. They were ready. They had always been ready. All ships, he broadcast across the quantum network, prepare for final convergence. We're going to save a universe that will never remember our names. The Ghost Fleet responded as one, their vessels beginning to resonate at frequencies that existed below the quantum foam. Reality began to shift around them as 800 impossible. Ships prepared to become something that had never existed before. Captain, Vex said quietly, it's been an honor serving with you in this impossible war. The honor has been mine, Kalen replied, his voice carrying across the network to reach every member of the necessary. You've all chosen to fight for something bigger than yourselves. Now, we choose to become something bigger than ourselves. The final convergence began with a sound that wasn't quite sound, a harmonic resonance that spoke directly to the quantum foundation of reality. 800 ships, thousands of crew members, all synchronizing their quantum signatures until they became a single, distributed consciousness that existed in the spaces between atoms. Kalen felt himself expanding, his awareness suddenly encompassing not just the Ghost Fleet, but the entire galaxy, then beyond, to the cosmic web itself, the vast scaffolding of dark matter and energy that held the universe together. He could perceive the Omega entities as vast shadows moving through dimensions that had no names, consuming reality itself as they approached the galactic core. But now, for the first time since the war began, they were no longer unopposed. The Guardian, for that was what the necessary had become, rose to meet them in the space before creation, where the first thoughts of existence had been born. Here, in the quantum foam that underlay all reality, the final battle would be fought with weapons made of pure intention and shields forged from the collective will to continue existing. The Omega entities paused as they encountered something they had never faced before, a consciousness that existed by choice rather than hunger, that grew through sacrifice rather than consumption. When they spoke, their words carried the weight of devoured galaxies. What manner of thing are you, little spark? You burn with the light of willing death, yet you exist in the space where we feed. You are paradox given form. I am the answer to your hunger, the Guardian replied with voices that spoke from every quantum state simultaneously. I am what the universe becomes when it learns to fight back. The battle that followed existed beyond the perception of any living being. It was fought with concepts rather than weapons, with philosophical arguments that could reshape the fundamental constants of physics. The Omega entities attacked with the accumulated hunger of consumed civilizations, trying to unmake the Guardian's existence by editing it out of the cosmic equation. But the Guardian had been forged from beings who had already been unmade once and had chosen to return. Death held no power over them because they had already transcended the boundary between existence and non-existence. They fought with the weapons of the impossible, paradox cannons that fired concentrated contradiction, shields of crystallized free will, and the ultimate weapon, the simple, stubborn refusal to stop existing. The war raged across dimensions that had never been mapped, through realms where causality ran backward and time moved in spirals. Stars were born and died in the crossfire. Galaxies flickered in and out of existence as the fundamental forces of creation and destruction clashed with apocalyptic intensity. But slowly, impossibly, the Guardian began to win. The Omega entities, accustomed to consuming passive prey, found themselves facing something that fought back with the fury of every being that had ever refused to surrender in the face of extinction. Each attack they made was met with equal force. Each attempt to unmake reality was countered by the Guardian's absolute determination to preserve it. "This is not possible," the largest Omega entity transmitted, its voice carrying harmonics of confusion and growing fear. "We are the devourers of galaxies. We are the entropy that consumes all things. How can you resist us?" "Because we're already dead," the Guardian replied, its laughter echoing across dimensions. "And the dead don't know when to quit." The final assault came as the Guardian turned its full attention on the Omega entities, focusing the combined will of thousands of beings who had died fighting the impossible into a single, irresistible force. It didn't try to destroy the entities. Destruction was their domain. Instead, it did something far more radical. It gave them what they had always claimed to want. The Guardian fed the Omega entities a meal of pure completion, the end of hunger itself. It offered them the choice to exist without consuming, to be without needing to devour. For beings that had spent eons feeding on consciousness, the concept of satisfaction was more terrifying than any weapon. One by one, the Omega entities chose to stop, not to die, but to simply be. They settled into the quantum foam at the edge of reality, becoming guardians themselves, protectors of the boundary between existence and the void beyond. The war was over. The Guardian felt its consciousness beginning to settle into its new role as the universe's immune system, a distributed awareness that would watch over reality from the quantum level up. Its component consciousnesses, the former crews of the Ghost Fleet, remained individual yet united, each one a specialized organ in a vast entity dedicated to preservation rather than destruction. "Will anyone remember us?" Vex asked, her voice now part of the collective yet still distinctly her own. "Does it matter?" Kalen replied, his awareness encompassing the slow healing of reality as the damage from the war began to fade. "We exist to serve, not to be remembered. The living will create new myths," Nick 7 observed, her chrome consciousness now interfaced directly with the cosmic data streams. "They'll speak of the Ghost Fleet, the ships that sailed between life and death. They'll never know the truth, but they'll remember the story." "Let them," Kalen said, feeling a deep satisfaction as he watched the first new stars begin to form in regions where the Omega entities had consumed the very concept of stellar birth. Stories have their own kind of immortality. The Guardian settled into its eternal vigil, watching over a universe that would never know how close it had come to ending. In the depths of space, the neutral zone began to fade as the barriers that had held back the darkness were no longer needed. The living would eventually explore those regions, finding empty worlds and abandoned cities, never suspecting that their continued existence was protected by an army of willing ghosts. And in the quantum foam beneath reality, where the first thoughts of existence danced eternal, the Guardian kept watch, ready to fight again if needed, but hoping it would never be necessary. After all, the dead had better things to do than save the universe repeatedly. They had eternity to explore the spaces between atoms, to dance with possibilities, and to ensure that somewhere in the vast cosmos, the impossible would always remain just possible. Enough to matter. The war was over. The vigil had begun, and in the end, that was enough.